What happens when the person you trusted most leaves you with more questions than answers? When grief opens a door you never knew existed, and behind it lies a truth you never imagined. In a small village on the outskirts of Enugu, a woman buried her husband on a Wednesday. No fanfare. No answers. Just silence, and a locked drawer she was never allowed to open. She thought she knew him. She thought 30 years of marriage meant no secrets. But sometimes, the deepest truths hide in the quietest places. This isn't just a story about death. It's a story about the lives we think we know, and the ones we never saw. Before the letter changed everything, there was Grace. A wife. A mother. A woman who believed love meant knowing someone completely. Welcome to Stories by the King, where every story carries a heartbeat, and every truth demands to be heard. Now, before we begin, where in the world are you watching from? Is it morning in Accra, evening in Johannesburg, or midnight in Atlanta? Drop your location in the comments below, and don't forget to hit like and subscribe. Now, lean in. Because what Grace found in that drawer didn't just change her past, it rewrote her entire future. Grace stood in the doorway of the bedroom she had shared with Michael for 30 years, and for the first time, it felt like a stranger's room. The funeral had ended 3 hours ago. The neighbors had gone home. The children, her 3 grown sons, had returned to their own lives in the city, promising to call tomorrow. Now it was just her and the silence. The kind of silence that pressed against your chest and made you forget how to breathe. She moved slowly toward the bed, her black morning dress whispering against her legs. Everything looked the same. The blue curtains Michael had insisted on buying. The wooden wardrobe they'd carried from their first house. The framed photo on the nightstand, their wedding day, both of them young and laughing, believing they had forever. But nothing felt the same. Nothing would ever feel the same again. Michael had died suddenly. A heart attack while working in his small shop in town. By the time Grace arrived at the hospital, he was already gone. No goodbye. No final words. Just gone. And now she was supposed to figure out how to live in a world that no longer had him in it. She sat on the edge of the bed and let her fingers trace the pattern on the bedspread. They had picked it out together 5 years ago at the market. Michael had haggled for 20 minutes, making the seller laugh despite herself. That was Michael, charming, stubborn, full of life. Even when money was tight, he always found a way to make her smile. She had loved him so completely that it never occurred to her to question him. Not once in 30 years. Not even when he stayed late at the shop. Not even when he locked the bottom drawer of his desk and told her, gently but firmly, that it held business papers she didn't need to worry about. Business papers, she whispered to the empty room, and something inside her shifted. Michael had been a good man, a faithful husband, a loving father. But he had also been human. And humans kept secrets. Grace stood up, her heart beating faster than it should. She walked across the room to his old wooden desk by the window. She had dusted around it 1,000 times, never thinking twice about the locked drawer at the bottom. Michael always kept the key on a chain around his neck. She had seen it every day for decades, a small brass key resting against his chest, and she had never asked what it opened. Trust, she had told herself. Marriage was built on trust. But Michael was gone now. And the key was in the wooden box on the dresser, along with his watch and his wedding ring and the other small pieces of him she had removed at the hospital. Grace picked up the key. It was warm from sitting in the afternoon sun. Her hand trembled as she knelt in front of the desk and slid the key into the lock. It turned easily, as if it had been waiting for her all along. Inside the drawer was a single brown envelope, unsealed, with her name written on the front in Michael's handwriting. Grace pulled it out and sat back on her heels, staring at the letters. Grace. Just her name. Nothing else. She opened the envelope and pulled out a letter, 3 pages, handwritten, dated 2 years ago. And as she began to read, the room around her disappeared, and everything she thought she knew about her husband, her marriage, and her life, began to crumble. My dearest Grace, the letter began. If you are reading this, then I am gone, and you have finally opened the drawer I asked you never to touch. I am sorry. Sorry for the secrets. Sorry for the silence. Sorry for the weight I am about to place on your shoulders. But you deserve the truth, even if it comes too late. Grace's hands shook as she read. Michael's words were careful, deliberate, as if he had written and written them 100 times. He told her about a life she had never known. About a woman named Ruth, a woman he had loved before Grace, a woman he had promised to marry when they were both 18. But Ruth had gotten sick, malaria that turned into something worse, and her family had no money for treatment. Michael had been poor then, working odd jobs, barely surviving. He couldn't help her. He could only watch as Ruth's life slipped away, week by week, until she died in a government hospital with nothing but a thin blanket and a prayer. I made a promise to her the night before she died, Michael wrote. I promised that if God gave me another chance at life, I would never let poverty steal someone I loved. I would work. I would save. I would build something that mattered. And Grace, I kept that promise. But I kept it in a way I could never tell you about. Grace's breath caught in her throat. She turned to the second page. Michael explained that after Ruth's death, he had started a small fund, a few naira here, a few there, saved from his earnings. Over the years, as his shop grew, the fund grew with it. He called it the Ruth Fund, though he never told anyone its name. He used it quietly, secretly, to pay for medical treatments for families in the village who couldn't afford them. A woman with breast cancer. A child with a broken leg. An old man who needed surgery. Michael had paid for dozens of treatments over the years, always anonymously, always without fanfare. And he had never told Grace because he didn't want her to feel burdened by the financial sacrifice. He wanted her to believe they were secure, even when he was giving away portions of their savings. But that wasn't the only secret. Grace's hands trembled as she read the final page. Michael confessed that he had another child, a daughter, born to Ruth before she died. A daughter Michael had never met but had supported financially her entire life. Her name was Patience. She was 31 years old now, living in Lagos, working as a schoolteacher. Ruth's sister had raised her, and Michael had sent money every month without fail, quietly, through a trusted friend, never revealing who he was. He had wanted to tell Grace so many times, but the years kept passing, and the secret grew heavier, and he convinced himself it was better to stay silent. I was a coward, he wrote. I should have trusted you with the truth. But I was afraid you would think I didn't love you enough, afraid you would see me differently. And Grace, I loved you more than words could ever say. Every single day of our life together, I loved you. I hope you can forgive me. And I hope you will do what I could never do, meet Patience. Tell her who I was. Tell her I loved her mother. Tell her I am sorry I was never brave enough to be her father. At the bottom of the letter was an address in Lagos and a phone number. Grace sat on the floor, the letter in her lap, tears streaming down her face. She didn't know what she felt, anger, betrayal, grief, confusion, all of it crashing over her like waves. Michael had been good. He had been kind. But he had also been human, flawed, carrying the weight of a past he could never escape. And now, in death, he had passed that weight to her. She thought about her sons, what would they say if they knew their father had another child? She thought about the village, what would they say if they knew Michael had been sending money away for years? But most of all, she thought about Patience. A woman who had lived her entire life without knowing her father's name. A woman who deserved to know the truth. Grace wiped her eyes and stood up slowly, her legs unsteady beneath her. She folded the letter carefully and placed it back in the envelope. Then she walked to the window and looked out at the village she had called home for 30 years. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold. Somewhere in Lagos, Patience was living her life, unaware that everything was about to change. And somewhere deep inside Grace, beneath the grief and the anger and the confusion, a decision was beginning to form. Michael had been too afraid to meet his daughter. But Grace was not Michael. And maybe, just maybe, this letter wasn't the end of the story. Maybe it was the beginning. Grace traveled to Lagos on a Monday morning, alone, carrying nothing but a small bag and the letter that had rewritten her life. She had told her sons she needed time to think, time to grieve in her own way. They didn't question her. They had always known their mother to be strong, capable, the kind of woman who could weather any storm. But as the bus rolled through the countryside toward the sprawling chaos of Lagos, Grace felt anything but strong. Her hands clutched the envelope in her lap, and her mind replayed Michael's words over and over. Tell her I loved her mother. Tell her I am sorry. She found the address just after noon, a modest apartment building in a quiet neighborhood, far from the noise of the city center. Grace stood outside for a long time, her heart pounding, her mouth dry. What would she say? How do you tell a stranger that her father, a man she had never known, had just died? How do you explain 30 years of silence? Finally, she climbed the stairs to the third floor and knocked on the door marked 3B. A moment later, the door opened, and Grace found herself face to face with a young woman who had Michael's eyes. Patience was tall and graceful, with a warm smile that faltered the moment she saw Grace's expression. Can I help you? She asked, her voice polite but cautious. Grace opened her mouth, but no words came. She had rehearsed this moment 100 times on the bus, but now, standing here, all her carefully planned sentences crumbled. Instead, she held out the envelope. My name is Grace, she said quietly. And I think you should read this. Patience took the envelope, her brow furrowed in confusion. She invited Grace inside, and they sat together in a small, sunlit living room while Patience read the letter. Grace watched her face change, confusion giving way to shock, shock giving way to tears. When Patience finally looked up, her eyes were red, and her voice was barely a whisper. He was my father. Grace nodded, her own tears falling freely now. Yes. And he loved you. He supported you your whole life, even if he couldn't be there. He was complicated. But he was good. They talked for hours. Patience told Grace about her life, about her mother, Ruth, whom she barely remembered, about her aunt who had raised her, about the monthly envelopes of money that had appeared for as long as she could remember, always unsigned, always mysterious. She had wondered her entire life who was helping them, and why. Now, finally, she had her answer. Grace told Patience about Michael, about the man he had been, the father he had been to their sons, the husband who had made her laugh even on the hardest days. She told her about the Ruth Fund, about the families he had helped, about the quiet, secret goodness he had carried all his life. And slowly, as the afternoon turned to evening, something unexpected happened. The anger Grace had felt, the betrayal, the hurt began to soften. She realized that Michael's secrets hadn't been born from selfishness or cruelty. They had been born from love and fear and the impossibly heavy burden of trying to do right by everyone. He had failed in some ways, he should have trusted her, should have been honest, but he had also succeeded in ways that mattered. He had saved lives. He had supported a daughter he never met. He had loved two women deeply, in different ways, and had tried to honor both. Before Grace left that evening, Patience asked her a question that would stay with her forever. Do you think he would have wanted us to meet? Grace thought about it, about Michael and his fears and his love. Then she smiled, a real smile, the first one since his death. I think he wanted it more than anything, she said. But he was too afraid to make it happen. So maybe that's why he left me the letter. So I could finish what he couldn't. They hugged at the door, two women bound together by a man who had loved them both, and as Grace walked back down the stairs, she felt something shift inside her. The grief was still there. The anger was still there. But so was something else, something like peace. Michael had left her a letter that changed everything. But in changing everything, it had also given her a gift she hadn't expected, a daughter she had never known, a part of Michael she could still hold on to, and a love that was bigger and more complicated and more beautiful than she had ever imagined. Grace returned to the village with Patience by her side. They told Michael's sons the truth together, and though there were tears and hard questions, there was also forgiveness. A year later, Grace and Patience opened the Root Fund to the public, turning Michael's secret legacy into something the whole community could celebrate. The lesson. Sometimes the people we love carry burdens we never see. And sometimes, the greatest act of love is to carry those burdens forward, not with bitterness, but with grace. Because a heart that chooses forgiveness over anger, truth over silence, and love over pride, will always find its way home. If this story moved you, hit like, share it, and tell me in the comments, could you forgive a secret like Michael's, or would it break your trust forever? Subscribe to Stories by the King, where every story carries a heartbeat, and every truth demands to be heard. This is Stories by the King, where love wins, and purpose finds its home.